This is James Taylor, and you're listening to The Creative Life. The Creative Life podcast is a show created for you, the creative. If you're looking for inspiration, motivation, and advice while at home, at work, or on your daily commute, then this show is for you. Each episode brings you a successful creative, whether that's a musician, writer, artist, designer, performer, educator, or creative entrepreneur. They share their journey, their successes, their failures, their creative process, their insights, and much, much more. Hey, it's James Taylor, and welcome to The Creative Life, a show where I talk with some of the most creative authors, musicians, artists, designers, entrepreneurs, and academics. And in this episode, I'm going to be talking to the wonderful bass player, Michael Manring, and we're going to be discussing why every performance is a failure and some of the deeper aspects of playing music. Let's get into the show. Hey, it's James Taylor, and I'm very excited today to bring you our featured guest. He is Michael Manring, and Michael is one of the world's leading solo bassists. He was the house bass player for Windham Hill Records, for whom he also recorded 4 solo albums. Michael has played on well over 500 recordings. He has garnered 2 gold records, Grammy nominations, a Berklee School of Music Distinguished Alumni Award, numerous Bass Player Magazine Readers' Poll Awards, and was the subject of a PBS TV documentary. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, James. It's a pleasure to be here.
So share with our listeners what's going on in your world just now.
Well, I just have a passion for the bass guitar. I guess that's a little unusual. A lot of people get the bug for guitar, regular guitar, or the piano, or the saxophone. For me, it's the bass. And I have been following that passion my whole life. And I'm especially interested in playing the instrument solo. And so I do a lot of playing with other people, but the main focus of my musical world is playing solo, doing solo recordings, and solo concerts.
And what was your introduction into playing bass? How did you get started in the first place?
The first thing that happened for me is I started hearing the bass on recordings and on TV, but not knowing what the instrument was. And I fell in love with the sound and had to figure out that it was a bass guitar that I was hearing. Had it been a trombone or something else, then I would have pursued that. But it was really the sound that got me into it. And this was the era, the late 60s. And so there was a lot of amazing music coming out. And right at that point, there were a lot of kind of cool things happening specifically with the bass, from James Jamerson and from Paul McCartney, people kind of moving the bass up a little bit in the mix, and really exciting things going on. So I just jumped into that world, and it has not let me go in all these years.
And so I very much associate your music with Windham Hill, great record label. And so were you kind of born and brought up in California, in the Bay Area? What was how did you kind of get involved in that world from your initial start of playing bass?
That was really lucky to fall into that Windham Hill world, and boy, I loved it. My upbringing, half of my childhood, the first half was spent in Southern California, and the second half was spent in Northern Virginia. So I kind of got a little of both coasts. And I grew up, my training was mostly as a jazz musician. And so getting involved with Windham Hill was a little bit different from what I had been doing, but it was really exciting for me because of that. I had to kind of shift my perspective a little bit. But I really love doing that. In jazz, we're kind of always looking to do something more complex and find ways of using more notes kind of outside of what you would expect. And with the Windham Hill approach, it was more about paring things down to simplicity and trying to say a lot with just a few notes. And that was a real, a wonderful experience and a good lesson for me.
So I kind of want to come back to that and talk about your time, doing kind of Windham Hill, and then kind of progressing on from that. But before we kind of get into that, talk to us. A lot of our listeners are really inspired by hearing what the lives of musicians are like. So, what does the first hour of your day look like?
I usually get up early, about 6 o'clock or so, and get my family all off to school and to work and make sure everybody's got breakfast and is fed. And then it's my turn to do my thing. So I do yoga every morning and then sit down and usually with a cup of green tea and and often the best part of my day starts where I get to play music a little bit.
And when I think about your playing, I don't think of you so much as a touring musician. I think of you more like as a recording musician as well. But has there been times in your life where you've been on the road more, and maybe how has that changed, and how does that when you are on the times that you are on the road, how does that kind of first hour of your day change?
Yeah, I do a lot of both, actually. A lot of touring and a lot of recording. I've always kind of tried to stay out of the mainstream of the music business. So I've done a few really long tours, but in general, the tours I do are pretty short. And often it's just a matter of going out for weekends or a week at a time. And you're right, it's a completely different lifestyle when you're on the road. But it's, in some ways, I try to maintain the continuity. It's still, I usually get up pretty early and do some yoga and get ready for the day. But on the road, it's more about traveling and getting ready for the gig.
Yeah, I was talking about bass players. I heard a lovely quote the other day from Danny Thompson, English bass player, and he was doing a concert somewhere in England, and he was asked to do a concert somewhere in England, and the promoter called him up and said, Danny, would you come and do this show? And he said, yeah, I'd love to do the show. And can you tell me? Well, she said, well, can you tell me how much you would charge? And he told her whatever his fee was, and she was a bit taken back by it, and she said, well, that's a lot of money. And he said, oh no. He said, I don't charge you anything to play. I charge you to the fact I have to travel. That's what I charge for. Absolutely. So that's the aggravating bit.
It is. I mean, the playing is, it's just always wonderful. It was very rare that it's a bad experience to play. But the traveling is sort of the opposite. It's rarely wonderful.
And as musicians, we all know as well that airlines typically do not treat instruments in the kind of care that we would want them to be treated.
Don't get me started.
It's I was talking to another musician the other day. And I can't remember who it was. It was possibly Tommy Emmanuel. I was talking to him about, and we were saying that we think there must be a conspiracy that these airline people that are packing the stuff into planes, they must see the guitar or the bass go up, and they must be really frustrated because they're probably looking at it thinking, God, these musicians, they have such a great life. I'm going to have to do something to give them a bad day because they may be a bit envious.
Yeah, I wonder that myself sometimes. But it's hard to say. I remember once I was taking a small flight down back home from Arcata, California, which isn't that far. So it was a small plane, and they actually used my instrument case as a stepping stool to put all the other baggage into the plane.
Well, hopefully they're getting a little bit better. I'm not so sure. So, what would you say is your biggest weakness as a music artist and as a creative person?
I have no acumen at all for the music business. I never have. In fact, I didn't really set out to be a professional musician because I realized that I just kind of don't get the music business at all. And so that's always been a challenge, and that's the biggest challenge, really.
And so I believe initially you kind of had this path about perhaps being a bass teacher, being a music teacher. Is that correct?
Yeah, I really wanted to be a music teacher. I really kind of believe in teaching. And I thought it would be something fulfilling, and I thought it was a kind of lifestyle that I would enjoy. I'm actually a little bit of a homebody, and so the touring sometimes is a little uncomfortable for me, although I really appreciate it. I have learned a lot. And so I kind of thought that being a teacher would be a good thing. But I just kept getting gigs, and then I got involved in Windham Hill, and it just seemed like a better deal. And I had the chance to play music that really meant a lot to me. And so I kind of had to put my first career choice on hold and become a professional musician instead. And it's worked out okay.
And so on the flip side, if the business side of music isn't something that you necessarily enjoyed, feel you have a kind of talent for, what would you say is your biggest strength, though?
I guess if I have any particular talent, I would guess that it's kind of seeing different possibilities. People always tell me they're really surprised when they see me play. They're always really surprised that I'm able to do as much with the bass as I am. And I'm taken aback by their surprise because to me the instrument is just, it's just so full. of possibility. It's just so full of sound and emotion and poetry. I mean, that's what the instrument is to me. And so I guess if I have any, kind of inborn talent, it would be something along those lines of being able to see those kinds of things.
So your approach to bass playing is obviously is quite a lyrical kind of style as well, and so you treat it as a solo instrument, which is often not. It's usually kind of felt as it's a supporting instrument in one way or the other. So how do you, when you kind of come at the bass? I speak to maybe guitarists, say jazz guitarists, who are very keen to kind of break out of thinking about shapes and thinking about things that can often get them trapped into one way of doing things. And so often they'll look at other instruments, they'll look at piano players, for example, like Art Tatum or some just, in order to kind of break them out of a kind of place. So when you first kind of came into playing bass, did you always have this kind of expansive idea of what was possible on the bass, or did it have to change, or maybe what were the causes of those changes, if that was the case?
I had that feeling about it from day one. It just seemed like something magical and wonderful and deep and just full of possibility. And my friends all, tried to convince me that, well, that's not really what the bass is all about. It has a particular role in music, and that's what you do with it. And I was, really fine with that, because the thing that really appeals to me about the instrument is that it does so many things well. So I love playing it conventionally almost as much as I love doing all this other stuff with it. But I couldn't, I could never give up on this idea of all these other sounds that it's capable of, and just kept goofing around with them on my own. And then eventually people seemed to want to hear them being played. And so I got more chances to do that kind of stuff.
And so you've got these different projects, different things on the go just now, but what is the one thing that you're working on at the moment that is exciting you most?
Well, I'm working on a new solo record. I mean, I always feel so pretentious saying that the solo music is, what's most inspiring, but, it really is exciting to keep finding new things to do. I'm also working a lot with a percussionist from LA named Chris Garcia, and we have a kind of a interesting project we do where we work with other artists. So we're kind of a rhythm section, and we work with a number of different artists. We work with a wonderful pipa player from China named Jia Ma. We work with a great Croatian guitarist named Miroslav Tadic, and Alex DeGrassi as well.
Oh, wonderful player. I think he was Windham Hill as well, I seem to remember.
He was Windham Hill. Yeah, he's somebody I've been playing with for just years and years. So this project with Chris is really fun because it's kind of revolving, and we're bringing in a lot of world music influences, and I'm learning a lot. So that would be the other project that's really, really fascinating me these days.
So does working with a percussion as opposed to, say, working with a drummer, does it give you more flexibility as a bass player, so you don't feel it necessarily has to kind of get back to just being a kind of a grounding thing? How is that different maybe than working with working like for you doing as a bass player working with a percussionist as opposed to you as a bass player working with a drummer?
That's a very astute question, a very good question. I think a lot of people would not realize that. But drums, it's an enormously powerful instrument, really loud and really very strong. So when you play with a drummer, not all the time, it depends entirely on who you're playing with, but in many of the sort of default positions of playing with a drummer, you really have to work with what they're doing. And often I played with many great drummers over whom, you just don't have any influence at all. It really, as I say, it really depends on the person.
Yeah.
But it's still a great musical experience. And that's just the nature of the instrument. It's so big and loud and strong. And it's really fun to do that. It's really fun to, go into that space and lock in with a drummer. But you're absolutely right. It makes you think in a certain way, makes you work in a certain way, because you kind of have to take into account the way the instrument functions. And so when you work with percussion, you're kind of freed up more because you don't have that kind of generally built-in kind of ways that you have to work around because of the frequency ranges of the various drums and things. So I really love working with percussionists as much as possible because it gives me that chance to open up and do different things. But it's fun working with drummers too. It's after goofing around in different ways for a while, it's really fun to just go back to
be in the pocket for a little bit.
Be in the pocket, backbeat, doing again, it's doing all these things that makes music so fascinating to me, and the bass in particular.
So tell us about a time when you worked on a project, you were working on something, you gave it your all, but for whatever reason, it just didn't work out. And more importantly, what were the lessons that you learned from that experience?
This may sound odd, but for me, I would say on some level, every performance is a failure. And that's kind of thrilling in a way. I'm not really that adverse to failing at music. One of the great things about music is if you completely fail, nobody actually gets hurt. It's not like tightrope walking or motor car racing or something. So failing in music generally is a great chance for growth. And performing especially is this bizarre experience. I heard about a psychological study that was done once that demonstrated that people are more afraid of performing than they are of dying.
Yes, I heard that the other day as well. It kind of blew my mind to think about that. It's because as a performer, as someone who's been a musician as well, it feels like quite a natural thing. But obviously there is this thing there. There's people. There's a fear there.
Yeah, and I think in any way you look at it, it's a pretty intense thing to do. And every time I perform, things happen that I didn't expect, and things happen that I didn't plan on, and that's always so fascinating to me. I guess it's maybe I'm learning something about some subconscious part of my mind or some part of my being that I didn't know. And things happen both good and bad in that way, and it's always fascinating. So after every performance, it's amazing to kind of sit down and think, wow. Why did that happen, and how did that happen, and how do I want to try to do things differently next time?
Yeah, I mean, that line there you just said about every performance is a failure. It made me think of quite strong differences between classical players and jazz players, where classical players have a certain, I suppose, responsibility, not necessarily to be creative in maybe the way that we think about creative, but they have to be good for the composer. They have to kind of interpret that, what the composer intended to be. Where jazz players, someone said to me the other day, there's no such thing as a failure in jazz, only opportunities. Right. Because if you make something that doesn't quite work, you repeat it again and people think it's jazz. But so I suppose with the being as a solo player, does that give you the time when you're maybe not working with percussionists, you're not working with other people? How does that feel for you? Because you can go in many different directions then. So because you're not tied to working necessarily doing certain things that other players are kind of having to respond to. You can kind of take your own little journey. So on the pieces that you're doing, how much have you kind of really kind of worked out, and you have certain parts that you kind of plan on doing it, and how much can you kind of go out on the tune a little bit?
Again, that's a really astute observation, and one of the things I really am fascinated by in playing solo. Normally, as a bass player, you're the foundation. You really have to lay the roadmap, and you can do some things that are surprising, but it's a very sort of objective process. But when you're playing solo, anything can happen. And so if I suddenly get a red herring to change key or to change the time signature or change the arrangement of the music, I can. And so I do. And that's one of the things that really fascinates me about it, is you can kind of follow your own stream of consciousness and see where it takes you. So that's what I generally do. I usually go out with a basic plan for what I'm going to do. And sometimes I follow that plan exactly, and sometimes it lasts about 30 seconds, and I go someplace I didn't intend at all, but then I learned something about why I wanted to do that. So that's one of the things that's really fascinating about it. And again, the thing that's fun is to be able to do that for 4 or 10 gigs and then play a different kind of gig where I'm, just doing something more conventional.
And when you're doing the solo playing, especially maybe if you've got a row of shows, on occasion, are you kind of taking yourself down alleys and avenues as a way to test yourself, to make things more interesting for yourself and not quite sure necessarily how you're going to get out of it, but to maybe try different things?
Absolutely. And I'm always kind of working with this idea of, am I trying to do something different, just to be novel? Or is that really the best choice? Am I really hearing something different? Or, am I being too safe? Am I playing, there's always these questions that I'm asking myself. And this is one way in which every performance is a failure, because there's no right answer. You're just always looking for the other possibility that you could take.
And talk to us about a time in your journey in music and in your career where you've had any kind of aha ideas or light bulb moments where you've kind of went, okay, this is what I need to be doing, or this is maybe I need to be kind of going this direction, either with my playing or the kind of people that you were working with. Are there any examples of that you can talk about?
There've been several. One was learning about Indian music, classical Indian music. I had a record of L. Subramaniam, the great Carnatic violinist, that I just listened to because I liked the sound of it. I didn't know anything about the music. I got that record, I guess, when I was 18 or 20, something like that, and just kept listening to it over and over. And then as I listened to it, I started to realize all the structure that was going on, and that was a real revelation for me. So I started learning more about Indian music and how deeply structured it is. It's kind of beyond belief in some ways, and that's been really inspiring to me. And I've tried to incorporate some of those ideas in the different things I do.
And it's interesting with I don't know so much on the melodic side, but on the percussive side, where it's translated down in an oral tradition through families, through like son to father to etc. And they use in Scotland we call it mouth music. So actually singing the percussive things rather than actually nothing's written down, obviously. So when it comes to approaching it from a melodic standpoint, how do you kind of get your head around it? Because it's coming from quite a different place. Time signatures. There's a lot more interesting things kind of going on, but they also understand. My understanding in a lot of Indian traditional music, improvisation is something that they kind of get.
Yes, it is. It's actually very deeply academic music. So there's all kinds of study you can do about how things are working, and it's very, very carefully thought out. It's extremely idiomatic, and that aspect of it, I don't feel the need to follow as much. But the kind of academic part of it is fascinating. And you're right, it is an oral tradition in the sense that nothing is traditionally written down. They have developed some forms of notation more recently. But it's all their music is based on the voice, in the same way that our Western music, you could say, is all based on the keyboard or on the piano. And so their conceptions of music are all based on the voice. And when you study Indian music, you're basically required to be able to sing anything you play. It's just kind of an assumption. And for the most part, anytime you're playing, you're kind of imitating the voice in some way or another. And you're right, that applies to percussion instruments as well. So it's a really interesting take on music. And in terms of the melodic sense, they're just these different turns that they use, these different very detailed ways of looking at melody that I study and try to utilize some of the ideas, but not so much the idioms. So
just kind of moving around a little bit here, your time with Windham Hill, very kind of influential label, and one of your friends on that label, Michael Hedges, has gone on to become a huge influence to many generations of guitarists, especially you see it now a lot with the Andy McKees, and who kind of took the kind of percussive style of what he did. So I mean, talk to me about your time kind of working with him, and also more generally that experience of the Windham kind of Hill years.
That was a really great experience. I got involved with Windham Hill from working with Michael Hedges. I started working with Michael when I was 19, I think I was. And we met and hit it off right away because we shared a lot of the same musical passions. And they were some kind of unusual ones, too, because we were both really into pop music and into 20th century music and lots of kind of different kinds of music that other people weren't so interested in. And at that time, he was pretty straightforward singer-songwriter kind of guy. He loved Neil Young, and he looked like Neil Young and sounded like Neil Young and played like Neil Young. But he had all this knowledge about music, all kinds of music, and had an amazing musical mind. And so he started to kind of branch out a little bit. And, as I knew him, he branched out more and more and started developing all these ideas. A lot, I would say most of the guitar techniques, I guess you would say, that he came up with that are so popular now really came about because he was trying to adapt ideas from 20th century music, from Bartók and from Weber and that kind of stuff onto the guitar. Mm. And, it was just, he was a dear friend, too. He's a wonderful, kooky, crazy guy. I could tell you some stories about hanging out with him, but you probably wouldn't believe they actually happened. Not sure I do. But it was just wonderful to spend time with him and watch him grow and develop into this just amazing genius of the guitar. And it was great to have such a good friend as well. And with Windham Hill, he asked me to play on his very first demo for Windham Hill, and that's how I found out about them, and then went out to play on his first record and met everybody, and that's how I got involved with the label. So it was a really wonderful experience.
And there were so many great artists that kind of came out of that time. We were talking earlier, just mutual friends, people you've worked with, the Barbara Higbees and the Mike Marshalls and the Darryl Angers. It seemed to be a certain time and place in music, and it seems to be very rooted in having lived in Northern California. It felt very Northern Californian. there was something about it. What was the thing that kind of gave it its uniqueness in that way?
I agree. I think that was a big part of it. In fact, when I got involved with Windham Hill, I was living in New York City as your basic, starving jazz musician. And for me, it was a real breath of fresh air because New York in those days, this is the early 80s, New York was really gritty and tough and, really difficult place to live. And all the music we were making kind of reflected that. And, it was a really kind of dark time. And I kind of just had my fill of that and just, wanted to kind of move away from that kind of vibe for a while. And the Windham Hill sound was just, very pure and straightforward. It was, in a lot of ways, it was sort of intentionally naive, is kind of how I used to think of it. And that just was really a good thing for me in those days. And it was just wonderful to be able to work with all the different artists and be part of the movement, really, and to see it become so popular. And, it was just an amazing time.
But I also know that there's a lot of, you mentioned those kind of East Coast players that really hated it. They just felt, oh no, it's that's not, it's not real music. Or there was quite a strong sense of some people being very much against what was happening there.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. A lot of my friends thought I had gone completely mad. Play all this beautiful, pretty, simple music, after we had worked so hard on playing, difficult, angular stuff.
Yeah.
And, some of the criticism was valid, but, with ideas like that, it's hard to say, one way is really right or wrong. It's just a matter of doing what's right for you at the time. And for me, it was just a really wonderful experience and one that I've still, feel enriched by in my musical life.
And I would imagine that it would have been probably more picked up in Europe, where there's in Europe there's the ECMs, there's more of a tradition of liking that kind of style of music as well, where maybe hard bop orientated New Yorkers, it wasn't such a thing.
Right. I mean, it was kind of amazing that it got as popular as it did, considering that, it was instrumental music and, we weren't making a lot of concessions to commercial popularity. It was always our objective to make pleasant sounds.
Yeah.
But it wasn't like we were trying to be famous or make a lot of money.
I remember speaking to Barbara Higbee about it, and just saying that it was kind of incredible. You were playing very large audiences and selling a lot of records, and it was instrumental music which was kind of very unusual.
It really was, and hardly ever happens. And we were amazed that it was happening when it was. But what a pleasure! What a lucky thing to have happen.
And what's the best advice that you've received about music and about making a living and playing music?
I'd say about playing music, I guess the best advice would be something about staying healthy and realizing that music really is a mind-body experience, and that it's a holistic experience. In the sense that bringing your whole being to it will help make the whole process more rewarding and more effective. In terms of the business, it's hard to say. I'm just so bad with all that stuff, and I never understand what's happening in the music business. I tried to follow the advice of several people, and sometimes it's worked, and sometimes it hasn't.
And is there any kind of online resources or apps or kind of gear that you're enjoying using? Any kind of technology that you're into just now?
I mean, the technology is so amazing now. I mean, it's just so impressive, and there's so much to be done with it. There's so much that I think we haven't even scratched the surface of a lot of it. There's a bunch of things I use that I just love. I use Logic, the basic Apple platform for music, and it's astounding how much you can do. What I can accomplish while I'm flying in an airplane is just amazing. Other things that are really helpful, instruments I have are made by the Zon Guitars that are just amazing instruments. I have an effects processor called the VB99 that's made by Roland. It's just astounding what it can do. It's really part of the instrument. And I control that with a thing that doesn't make any sound on its own, but just it is amazing in what it does. It's made by a guy named Keith McMillen. It's called a soft step controller. So all these things just open up so many possibilities. And there's this kind of beautiful problem we have of trying to figure out how we're going to incorporate this technology into the music in a way that still keeps it human and still keeps the music from fading into the technology.
Yeah. And it's almost in the same way that technology companies, you're seeing them now, where you're seeing a lot of things like wearable tech and things where it's now starting to be, good technology when it's at its best is you don't notice it really. It's just
right.
It's kind of invisible.
I would agree with you, and I'm always looking for how I can put the things together in that way where the technology is really kind of becomes inherent in the music. It becomes sort of embedded in the music, and it is working to help the music get the message across. And it's always a challenge. That's one that I guess wrong sometimes too.
And if you could only recommend one record or book to our listeners, what would it be?
Oh boy, that's a hard one. I guess if it was one book, maybe it would be the Upanishads, but I don't know if that's cheating. The ancient Indian book of philosophy. It's been a source of inspiration. Very, very short, but a great source of inspiration for many people for many years. Maybe that or the Tao Te Ching, which is sort of similar on the Chinese side.
And let's imagine if you woke up tomorrow morning and had to start from scratch. So all you have is your bass and the knowledge you've acquired over your years of music. What would you do? How would you restart?
I wouldn't do things any differently. I just love music. I love the bass guitar as a pathway into this majestic world that music is, and I would just keep doing that. I would hope that what I was doing would interest somebody enough that I could make a living at it. But even if I didn't, I would make a living some other way and just keep taking part in the music making process.
Well, Michael, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been great just hearing about your journey, your life in music and with the bass. And share with our listeners the best way that they can connect with you and learn more about your live touring and your recordings and the other projects you're working on.
Probably the best way is my website, which is actually manthing.com. Man-Thing has been my nickname ever since I was about 6 years old, because it's a comic book character. You're not one of the better known ones, but a basic swamp creature. And so that's probably the best way.
That's great. And we'll put that on the show notes here as well, so people can go and check that out, and also some of the other things that you've mentioned on the interview. Michael, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been a delight speaking to you, and I wish you all the best with the new solo recording.
The pleasure's been mine, James. Thank you so much for having me.
Hey, James Taylor here again. And if you're interested in living a more creative life, then I'd love to invite you to join me as I share some of the most successful strategies and techniques that high-performing creatives use. I put them all together in a free downloadable ebook that you can get by going to jamestaylor.me. That's jamestaylor.me to get your free downloadable ebook on creativity.